G'day investors and welcome to another episode of Stocks to Watch. My name's John Franklin, an experienced exploration geo and your host. Today we're taking a closer look at Angkor Resources Corp, which is the first North American publicly listed oil and gas exploration company active in Cambodia. Today I have with me Delayne Weeks, who is the CEO of Angkor. Firstly, Delayne, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, John. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you here. So first question off the bat, I guess, is your subsidiary EnerCam recently kicked off a seismic program on the Block 8 onshore oil and gas project in Cambodia. Can you tell us new viewers about kind of what's the project all about, its potential and the scope of this seismic program?
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Sure. Look, ultimately, Cambodia has never had an onshore oil and gas well drilled in the entire country. So this would be a huge undertaking for us to go in and do the seismic and ultimately discover pay zones and drill with drilling. We're running a 350 line kilometer, two-dimensional seismic program. And you can see on the photo above that we're going to be running down the west side and we will be hitting 3 basins there. And then on the northeast, we're going to hit a 4th basin. So it was delayed somewhat with some border issues between Cambodia and Thailand, and this equipment's coming in from Thailand. But ultimately, we're booked on a ship, and we have been working on this for several months with our geoscientists, and they're very, very excited to get on the ground here. So this will open up what we hope will be drill targets that will identify and give us places to drill Cambodia's first domestic oil and gas onshore.
Very exciting. I mean, I was just reading up before that it's previously been explored for hard rock minerals, but it hasn't really had this modern era exploration done, so it's extremely exciting. As far as for Cambodia, what makes oil and gas such an important commodity for a nation like Cambodia?
Well, it's a developing nation, but first and foremost, we should recognize that across the world, hydrocarbons still provide 80% of the global energy needed. Yes, we're working to add renewables, but that's just the fact. So also, you know that India and China and Asia have a really large population. So here's Cambodia without any domestic oil and gas. And ultimately, they spend billions importing all of their hydrocarbon-based energies. And thirdly, when we look at the GDP in Cambodia, and it's roughly about 35 billion per year, well, they're spending 10% of that just bringing in importing. So imagine discovering something that instead of paying out 10% of your gross domestic product, you're actually able to have it yourself and you become the potential exporter rather than an importer. It's a massive change for a country. And we know this because we've gone through it in Alberta, Canada. And we've got the statistics to back it up. We know exactly what happens. And so it's going to be a huge difference, not just for our company, but for Cambodia as a whole. It will have a whole new industry with a variety of additional secondary midstream. So we go midstream, upstream, and downstream industries, and that in itself changes the whole economic climate of the entire country.
Absolutely. It sounds like it could be a game changer. And like you say, for developing nations, whether it be minerals or oil and gas, it always provides that economic boost. So as far as the agreement that you have, both with the government and any other parties, how long is that Block 8 agreement for? And does it have an option for renewal?
So great question, John, and something that is also of benefit to us. so often across the globe right now, permitting becomes a huge issue. This is a 30-year production sharing contract. So right from exploration through development, production, and once we're in production, then it's open for renewals. So that means it's fully permitted. It's done. It took us several years to get there, but well worth the wait now because now we can accelerate. The initial plan was about 7 years of exploration, and honestly, we're planning on and have already started to accelerate that so that within 2.5 years, we're there. And the seismic is part of that. You know, it had been slotted for the second year. We're saying, no, let's do this ASAP. Let's get on the ground. Let's get it interpreted. Let's identify drill targets. Let's get the drilling lined up again. All of this has to be imported because, of course, that industry is not developed yet in Cambodia. However, it is surrounded by oil and gas production. So ultimately, that 30-year production sharing contract, it's a big deal. It allows us to move quickly where we need to, and it also is pretty flexible if we need to make some additional changes to it.
Great. So you mentioned that you had kicked off the seismic on top of exploratory drilling. Just for anyone who's not really aware of why that's done, kind of what's the upside? What data do you get from the seismic?
The seismic it's an exercise that gives us recordings of activity beneath the ground. And of course, oil will send a different vibration back than hard rock. And so as we take equipment out, we don't use dynamite, but it's called an enviro vibe. And it's a heavy equipment that puts down a long, heavy signal. It's like a big thump on the earth, to be honest. But it's connected to wires and receivers that then transmit back a signal to say, okay, here's what happens. And then you get these waves and of data that come back. And that data becomes really, really important. And over the years, that data has also improved tremendously. So technology, innovation, interpretation has become better and better and more successful. So we can start to identify oil and gas deposits much quicker than we did in the past.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned those advancements and kind of how does that affect the exploration to production cycle in terms of timelines and also data accuracy?
Right. So like I said, the geoscientists are now able to interpret that and say, okay, we have here a change in structure. We've got a formation here. You know, we might have a basin, but what's really in the basin? And with the innovations and technology that's come out, we're so much better equipped to take that information and move forward much more efficiently towards the actual production. So that data, good data, then we shorten the timelines. Like I said, our production sharing agreement allows us for up to 7 years before we're kind of moving towards developmental and production, but we think it will be much quicker because we've got nations that, you know, have spent decades in this. So now we can take the best practices of countries like Canada and say, okay, what do we know? How can we move it forward? And here's what the impact that it has on both the timeline and the quality of the let's say the reserve or the resource that we can identify.
Fantastic. Yeah, learning from others' mistakes and kind of doing efficiencies from there. I like to hear it.
Sure.
So switching more to the finance side now, you recently released your report for the first quarter of 2025. What key milestones has Angkor accomplished and why are those milestones significant for investors?
So ultimately, Angkor manages to deliver several areas concurrently. So first and foremost, part of our plan as of 2 years ago was we need to put revenue streams in place. So we have in Canada oil production that we share a part of, and and that gives us revenue. As well, we are looking at acquiring a couple more production wells that will increase that amount of revenue, and that becomes our backstop. If you got cash rolling in each and every month, then it covers your expenses and it doesn't leave you vulnerable in the marketplace if there's a change in. So we don't. That's one, and like I said, we've lined that up for the next 60 to 120 days. We will have additional production in place. We are currently drilling on a copper porphyry on our mineral project, so we move those along at the same time that we're doing the oil. And like I said, we've fast-tracked and despite any challenges, we're moving seismic equipment into Cambodia. Actually, it's on a ship next week, so we should be landing and rolling out the beginning of that program. And ultimately, we also are working on increasing the water flood on our existing oil and gas in Saskatchewan, Canada. So I think these milestones in 2025 are very, very significant because we've delivered quickly. We've turned some of those deliveries into additional cash flow. We will be adding to that in the latter part of 2025. And we've also managed to seek out some additional funding to perhaps look at a second license in Cambodia, onshore.
Okay, all engines firing by the sounds of it. And it's very exciting to hear you've got gold and copper also within the portfolio. Great hard assets to have together with oil and gas.
I think it's always helpful, John, having, and people say, oh, aren't you, trying to do too many things at once? But when you have the right people in place, they're like a finely oiled machine. So our mineral team just clicks along. They know exactly what they're doing, and those licenses are in the northern part of the country, whereas our oil is down in the southwest. But it also makes for a really exciting, I guess, an aura for the entire company, because we got gold happening, and we got copper happening, and we got oil happening, and we got 2 jurisdictions, we got some production here, and it boils down to having the right people in place that get the job done. And I think Ankor's done a very good job of that. I'm so proud of the teams because they move things forward.
Fantastic. Great to hear. Well, as far as for wrapping this up, for current and future investors, what makes Angkor Resources a good investment opportunity right now, but now and in the long run?
There's a slide that really wraps up the impact of the oil and gas and what happened, like I said, before we had oil and then afterwards. Ultimately, investors can take a look at that and say, okay, what's going to happen here? We go from, and even if you think back in the 50s and 60s, when $1 million was a lot of money, this took a province from 0 to 40 billion between the time it started and 2006. And then, now we're at 170 some billion per year. Imagine that kind of change in today's money for a country like Cambodia. And we're not far away from that. What's going to happen is that's not going to take decades to develop. As soon as it's proven, as soon as we drill and we see the pay zones, that's going to change all of the secondary industries and the potential for those to be taking place. So one of them, and that's a longer term, that's probably the longest term thing that investors can look towards, because I think we'll be drilling within 12 months. But if we shorten that up, adding additional revenue over the next 3 months, that's going to be a bump for investors as well. Third thing that we should be aware of is also moving forward, drilling copper and gold concurrently while we're working on the oil. And we would be having what I hope to be positive drill results in the next several months on that too. So that's another bump that would be substantial. And I think just maintaining the current oil operations that currently give us revenue We water flood. We're putting more water back into the reservoir because there was such a large void, and that's giving us a long-term greater value, that almost double of what we paid for it a couple of years ago. So there's a number of catalysts that are front and center that are coming forward with Anchor. Smaller ones are within the next 60 to 120 days. And then, of course, the long one will be when we get the results from the seismic, the interpretation of that, and identify those drill targets. So, yeah, I think there's some great things happening, and we've mitigated the risk, but we've also diversified it for investors. So if something, I don't know, if there's a hiccup in the market with copper or gold, or then maybe oil can take over. If there's a hiccup with oil, then we've got the copper and the gold that can. And I think that for me as an investor, I like that. I like to know that I don't have all my eggs in one basket, in one prospect, on one license. I've got numerous things happening that will help carry my value and my investment through to greater growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I saw a graph recently that showed gold moves first, copper follows it, and then the third thing to follow that is generally oil. So you've ticked all three of those boxes. So I think that's well diversified. And another thing I wanted to mention, you said the Alberta case. I'm in Sweden, so it's a bit closer to home. In Norway, the exact same thing happened. They up until the 60s, they not the wealthiest country, and it completely changed them, and they put a lot of investment into it for that. So there's plenty of it's exciting.
Yeah, look, oil and gas is something that we can't live without. Every country has to have energy, and Norway and Canada, frankly, are the global leaders in how to make this advance with good technology, innovation. They're in difficult geological areas. I mean, it's not like a warm, toasty, easy to do all the time, right? I mean, we've got lots of diversity in climate there, and yet they've managed to move themselves forward in that industry and be in the top 6. I was doing research the other day on, okay, what's happened in the last 5 decades with each country and its oil and gas, and what has it done for the country? And it's really interesting to see that how it literally changes their their whole economics of the country, and also the GDP right across. But it's so much the other industries that become involved. In other words, okay, so you hit oil in a country like Cambodia, and there's nothing else in the in play. So now we've got businesses that can build the tanks that hold the oil, and build the containment that will contain and put the rubber mats in as part of the environmental protection. And then there's the transport trucks, and then there's the tires that go in the transport trucks, and it goes on and on and on. And I think that's where, when you start to build an industry, there's a whole variety of elements that bring upside to it. And we've seen it with the hard rock mining in Cambodia, certainly with Renaissance having its first kind of commercial gold mine in the country. It's a big deal. And so ultimately, we think that the oil and gas as well will be one of the biggest changes for that country in this century.
Well, we will be following closely there and looking forward to seeing some more results. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Delayne, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, John. Like I said, it's always a pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.